Okay. We're just letting a few more folks in and then we can get started. And if everyone wants to mute, that would be awesome. Oh, you'll have to find them and mute them, Paisley. We're on the hunt now. Okay. Good. Well, welcome. I'm Alicia Peters. I'm the Executive Director of Digital Alberta, and we are your gaming industry association for the province. It's great to see so many folks here from the community. This is the second webinar that we're doing this series leading up to the Alberta Game Series, which happens in Edmonton on October 13th. So big thanks to our partners, Edmonton Screen Industries Office, Calgary Economic Development, and Calgary Game Developers Association. If you didn't catch it last year, it's an awesome event. We do, a day of international and national speakers. There's a game showcase, there's mentorship, and just an awesome opportunity to connect with your peers around the province. So make sure you sign up for updates on the site, which Ruby is going to drop in the chat right now, and it'll give you all the details of like early bird pricing and all the things that are ahead. Also, you should follow us on social because we've got a lot of other programming on the go. We're going to be at Gamescom in August, and so we're going to be hosting an Alberta reception there. So let us know again, drop us a note in the chat if you're going to be there, and we'll make sure that you get on the invite list. So the first webinar we did was on market viability and competitiveness, and we're excited to follow that up with a behind the scenes look at working with a publisher. So we've got an absolute pro with us today who's going to take us through the ins and outs of what that assessment process looks like. Jasper Barnes is the head of game scouting at Team 17. He's joining us for the UK. So his evening, our morning. He's formerly worked with major studios, including Ubisoft and Sega on the talent acquisition side, and has been working with indie studios for coming up on 4 years now with Team 17. So we had the pleasure of meeting her at GDC this March, and I can tell you, he is the person that you want to be getting the rundown from when it comes to publishing an indie game. So Team 17 works with studios around the globe. They've been doing this for over 3 decades. They have iconic titles like Worms, The Escapist, and Overcooked. And I think Overcooked 2 is either just released or just about to come out. They have over 110 games in their portfolio. So there's going to be a ton to learn from Jasper. I'm going to hand it over to him. He's going to share a bunch of information. We're going to leave lots of time for questions at the end. So feel free, though, to drop those in the chat as they come to you. And thank you so much for being here, Jasper. I'm going to hand it to you.
Thank you so much for that introduction. Hello, everybody. Really excited to be here as well. It's good to see a lot of people in the lobby, some names that I recognize, which is both wonderful, but also slightly intimidating. There's some people I know here who have obviously come to see how good I am at this sort of thing. So I guess thank you. I'm going to share my screen first and foremost. I've got, I don't know if I'm able to share screens at the moment. I think it might be disabled. But once that kink is worked through, I've got host disabled participant screen sharing at the moment. Awesome. Now I'm hosting. Yeah. Okay. So got a PowerPoint that we're going to work our way through here. Is this coming through okay? I can see. Lovely. Thanks, Alicia. Perfect. So here's to talk today about demystifying the greenlight process. So the greenlight process is what we at Team 17 and largely amongst other publishers refer to as the assessment process, the pre-signing process, kind of what happens from the point at which you say hello to a publisher for the first time up until hopefully you receive an offer, form a contract, you move into partnership with that person. Called Greenlight because of the various stages of sign-off that belong to it, and looking to bring a little bit of context, insight, consideration as to what happens a little bit behind closed doors as part of that process. A lot of what I'm going to speak about will be specific to Team 17. That's where I can really get into detail, really offer some clarity and some visibility. But of course, there are going to be more standardized truths that exist across multiple publishers. So I would say some of the things that I say do take with a pinch of salt in the sense that not necessarily everyone's going to work in exactly the same way. But the broad considerations that I talk through are going to be fairly synonymous with other publishers as well. So it's worth being aware of. I have started with a bit of an introduction to me, largely because I want the picture of my dog in this PowerPoint. That's a bit of a personal goal for me, and it's always worth showing off. So I am Jasper, and this is Asher, who is my child and my love. I am the head of game scouting for Team 17. This has already been run through, but I've got the slide on it, so I'm going to talk about it again. Been at Team 17 for 3.5, 4 years now, actually coming from a background of talent acquisition. Relatively new to the industry. I'm in my 6th year now, so I'm by no means part of the furniture, but what I have done, I've immersed myself in quickly and got a lot of experience at a few different places. And yeah, my background in talent acquisition is really, I would say, guided the way that we do game scouting and assess titles through Greenlight Team 17, in the sense that it's not just about the game, it's about the team as well, it's about the people, it's about understanding what that full partnership needs to look like, rather than just buying into a simple concept, buying into a concept, but also a wider team that we can really see, hopefully, a much more long-term partnership being with. I think that's a lens that's getting more and more commonplace amongst indie publishers anyway, but I do think the background I have there actually provided quite an interesting perspective for what we do in game scouting. Big transition into game scouting a couple of years ago now. Started heading up the team of fantastic people, some of whom I hope you either know or get a chance to know in time. And in that time, I've overseen some amazing games being signed. Dredge, obviously coming out earlier this year, has been absolutely fantastic. Age of Darkness the year before, Gorge due out later this year, and recently announced a couple of titles, Undead Ink and Earthless. Anyone that tuned into Not E3 might have seen those. So excited about what we've done, excited about what we're currently doing, and really, really excited about what's around the corner. Biggest pain of my job is because I'm very much in the future strategy content planning side of a publisher. I know our release slate for 2024, 2025 is so good, and I can't tell anyone. So keeping that big secret is such a challenging part, but I assure you, keep an eye on Team 17. There's some amazing stuff yet to come. So what I want to talk about first and foremost is get a bit of an agreement or a sense of, what a developer might experience when they deal with the publisher, when they first have an interaction, when they're looking to get their game signed by an indie publisher, what that experience might look like from your side of the table, and some of the assumptions you might jump to. So as a very quick timeline, to go over kind of what you would feel and what you would encounter over your time frame. This is very much an idealized version of events, but there's not a huge amount of stages. Simply, you would submit your game, you would have an introduction with a member of the game scouting team or the business development team, publishing, whatever hat they're wearing, you would have some sort of introduction. It could be through a website submission, it could be through attending an event, could be events like this. It could even be that you've submitted your game already onto Steam and a game scout reaches out to you or a publisher makes a direct approach. But whatever it is, you end up having that first meeting, that first point of sort of inception. What you might do off the back of that is have send across some review materials, like here's a high-level overview of what our game is, here's a teaser trailer, here's a few bits and pieces. And you probably assume that Game Scout looks at it and thinks this is cool or this isn't cool, and they make a simple decision based on that. Once they've decided that, you then have more of a sort of what would feel like a more thorough meeting with a game scout or a member of the business, and that's where they would start talking about, so what you've done so far is really interesting, but what is the broader plan? What is the plan? And what are you looking for in a partnership? Are you looking for funding? Are you looking for assistance with porting, co-development? Is it just really about sort of market share and marketing and life cycle support you're looking for? What is the ideal partnership that you're looking for? They're probably, we generally will do a little bit of testing about kind of exactly what the, how complete your knowledge is of what you're making at the moment. And we say that not to patronize, but we just want to make sure that, we do work with very, very indie developers that might not fully understand the full limitations of what certain engines can do or certain expectations of specific genres, the sort of time, work, and energy that can go into specific elements. A number of times that, especially being Team 17 and the portfolio that we've got, that we will speak to very, very green developers that have never made a game before that are very excited to bring us a massively multiplayer, online, physics-based, heavy net-coded, battle royale game that they think is going to be the best parts of PUBG meets Overcooked meets Gang Beasts, which is a cool concept, but not having a thorough understanding of what that means from a sheer technical perspective. I'm not a programmer, but doing a little bit of digging away to make sure that they have some understanding of what they're stepping into is really, really important part of that element. But either way, you have that meeting, you get a sense that hopefully went really well. And off the back of it, you maybe share a build or a demo or a vertical slice with the game scout to be able to get more of an idea of what it is you're working on. You probably think they play it, and that's really good. And I decide this Battle Royale Overcooked Gang Beast thing is really, really great. Let's fall into due diligence. And during a due diligence process, you would end up speaking to a few other members of the publisher, whether it be a designer, could be a producer, could be a coder, could be members of the marketing and sales team, but a few other subject matter experts who kind of really drill into specifics of what it is you're making. So a producer might ask if they can have a look at your development plan, have a look at your budgets, your resource plans, any proposals for milestones that you've got. A marketing manager might ask if they can get a bit of a breakdown of, any marketing activity you've done so far. If you've got Steam wish lists, can you give any idea of kind of what territories they're largely based in, or, any key beats that you've made so far that have really caused, additional traction, so that in theory, we could build a campaign that amplifies those efforts. But either way, you spend an hour, 2 hours maybe speaking with a few experts within the publisher, and then frankly, probably hear not very much for a little while. And there will be definitely an expectation that behind closed doors, Team 17 are maybe looking at market analysis is a word that's thrown around a lot of the time. How many people are going to buy this game? Are we building a forecast? Whatever it's going to be. But as far as you're concerned, that job is now done. Like, you've answered all the questions. And then at some point, ideally in the near future, sometimes far future, you receive an offer that comes through. And it seems like a relatively simple process. A quick hello, we play the game, we do some sense checking. If that checks out, we do some heavy sense checking. If that all checks out, we'll give you an offer. Happy days. But actually, on the other side of the table, and part of the reason that sometimes these processes can take quite a long winding path and take longer than is usually expected, is because there's a lot of stages of due diligence and checks that we want to be sure that we're doing behind the scenes, just to make sure that we're making smart investments. I think a general tone that I'm probably going to end up talking a few times about over the course of this webinar is, understanding that, game publishers absolutely are here because of love of the craft, love of the industry, love of the product, full of gamers, love what we do, super proud of the developers we work with, the games that they're making, and the stuff we do ourselves as well. But above all of that, especially as a public trading company, there is going to be, these are investments. That's what we're looking to make as well. So there has to be a certain level of due diligence, there has to be a certain level of compliance around these investments we're making. And that's a lot of the stuff that often happens, without your involvement, a little bit silently, rightly or wrongly. But that's a lot of the work that's happening in the background to make sure that all of those checks are being covered off. So sort of behind the scenes, what are we working towards? What are we truly trying to work out? I think that it's fair to be wondering questions like, what is a publisher really looking for? Are there set questions that you're looking to have answered? How can we help you answer them? Is something developers will often say to us during this due diligence process, which is reasonable. So to bring a bit of clarity to that, I've labeled what I call the 3 C's to signature, because we love the 3 C's in the games industry. So this feels like a good way to wham it in here as well. And there's 3 big questions that we're really looking to have answered over the course of this process. And I suppose 3 different stages that your game has to go to, depending on which stakeholders it's working with at any given time. And it will break these down as the next couple of slides and go into these in more detail. But start off with captivating. This was the hardest C to find. I got to competent commercial really fast, and this took some time to really think of. But captivating nails it. So first and foremost, it's an exciting concept. It's demonstrating the potential of what your game could be. It has to be impactful. It has to be exciting. It has to be, eye-catching, and really make a game scout or a producer or a publishing manager really sit up and get excited about what you're making. That in itself, you could do an entire day-long workshop on, a week workshop. You could do a conference on what that means to be a captivating game. There's so much that goes into that. And I'll break down a few thoughts a little bit later as to kind of what that specifically might mean and some of the things you could do to ensure that you're hitting that as best as possible. But really, it's that attention-grabbing moment just to make sure that, of the hundreds, if not thousands of games every year that are submitted to a publisher or a publisher meets with, how can you be one of the 10, 20 that end up with a publishing contract? A lot of it is that minute one appeal, that immediate impact, and finding something a bit exciting. So there's the big wow factor that you start off with. Then you go on this path of suddenly having to look at the sort of, demonstrating the competence and proving yourselves to be competent as developers. And this is where you can almost end up feeling a little bit like you're doubling back on yourself. Captivating moment is all about, look how amazing this is, look how amazing we are, this is incredible, this is the greatest investment you could make, it's going to be the Fortnite of the future, let's get involved in this. But when it comes to competency, it's a little bit more actually having a bit of self-awareness and being quite self-critical where needs be. A developer that comes to us and says, we've got this amazing game, it's a physics-based online multiplayer game, it's going to be easy, we're great at making games, don't worry about it. Versus someone who says, honestly, yeah, like physics online, that's a risk, that's messy, we're worried about it, but we've got a solid plan in place to tackle it. Like, we will take developer B every day of the week, because that shows competence, that shows an understanding of the difficulties and leaning into them. You know, it's not a weakness to know that there are challenges with game development. If there aren't challenges, you're not being innovative enough, arguably. Like, you should be looking to be groundbreaking, you know, treading new ground. So there should be challenges that come up, but knowing what they are and planning to mitigate them is the ideal way to get through that phase. And the final one is the commercial test. And that's what I spoke about earlier about, you know, this is ultimately an investment. This is ultimately something that we're looking to bring to players to drive revenue, to support our business, and hopefully to support your business as well. That's very much the goal. It should be a partnership. And at that stage, we're looking for marketable appeal and business viability. So, you know, marketable appeal, that is going to be, there is a clear audience base that are interested in games like this. And we think because of this new hook or this new mechanic or this new take we're taking on it, here's the reason that we think that's going to really resonate with this existing crowd. That's sort of step one. Step two beyond that is, and then it's also so cool for these additional reasons that all the other players that don't usually play these games are also going to flood towards it. That's kind of dream state in terms of building that commercial model, because that directly leads into the business viable. You know, if you're going to make a game that we believe is going to do overcooked numbers, you almost, you know, could ask for a blank check, right? Like, when it's got something that's that level of market appeal and got that level of sort of return on investment, there's almost no downsides to making that jump. So really working out what is that, you know, where are you looking to hit and what is the potential of this as an investment is a really key thing to look at. And it is that final check, which is more often than not, you will find done on the publisher side. That's a lot of that on the timeline, that final sort of blank moment of silence or that period of silence. Part of that is because of the natural dynamic of how publishers, developers interact. There is definitely a conception that there's sort of the creatives and the developers and the commerciality comes from the publishing arm. I think in truth, in the indie world and actually in the AAA world, it's starting to get a lot more hand in hand. But I think because of that assumption, it ends up being a little bit more split, where sort of the publishing team sort of looks and start a bit more independently. But what we will say is, you know, more and more now, developers are getting involved in these conversations. Publishers are sharing that information, sharing their assumptions, sharing what they believe this game could be, ahead of any sort of offers, and just make sure there's alignment there that you know, we both believe in these products in the same way. So that's kind of the high level overview of what the 3 C's are. And how that ties to an actual process, because it's all very well to say you want a captivating game, but why does that mean I don't hear from a game scout for 2 months? Like, that's ridiculous. Those two things are not fully related. So to talk about what this means in practical terms and what sort of journey a game would go on and a game scout would take that journey on through each of these stages. So to start off with, trying to anticipate if a game is captivating. You know, this is what me or a member of my team would be doing for multiple games a day, multiple games a week. This is, you know, a huge part of what we do. That initial shortlisting criteria of thousands of submissions, thousands of developers, how we try and narrow it down to the ones that we really want to focus our time on and focus the time of the business on, to make sure that when we do bring in these subject matter experts, the production team, the design team, the programming team, that we're utilizing them in the right places for the best opportunities. So simple one starts off with reviewing the materials that have been sent through, whether it be a pitch deck, whether it be GDDs, whether it be videos that have been sent through. Anything that we get will be read. I think that's something that I always say is, in my view, is kind of the big difference between this and my background in talent acquisition. When you apply for a job, you submit CVs and a cover letter and a photograph and references and all these things, and people don't read it. They look at your CV, spend 30 seconds, move on to the next thing. What I will say when it comes to submissions for games, everything is read, everything is poured over, all this information is really pieced through. So kind of send everything you have, because I assure you it will be read and it will be considered as part of the shortlisting process. So first and foremost, read through that and identify USP and viability for what this game is going to be. And there's 2 elements to that. When I say USP, that goes without saying, you know, looking for something that is first of its kind, that's looking to be the best of its kind, taking a new take to an existing formula, trying something different, unique, like we all know what that means. In terms of viability, that is a simple sort of sense check that a game scout will also do. If you're looking to create a 2D puzzle platformer that is, you know, going to provide 3 or 4 hours of amazing gameplay experience, but it's not the most, you know, it's not the deepest game that is going to exist on Steam. But you're asking for $24 million to make it. Like, that's not viable, that in itself. And that's a very extreme version. But there is a level of cutting out those extreme cases, those edge cases, that a game scout will be responsible for, because they are sadly opportunities that are never going to hit that commercial sense. That's what it comes to in terms of viability. That'll be having a look at the team who are aboard, the team size, the budget they're asking for, the scope of the game, and start to get a basic understanding of, is there a world where, plus or minus 20, 25% accuracy, where these inputs equals that output, and how do we feel about that? I think that, within a margin of error, provided there is some sense there, we've then advanced the meeting with the dev. And this was definitely on the first, this is where I suppose a developer would first realize a publisher could be interested when they have this first conversation with a game scout, and talk about all the things I spoke about earlier. Initial sense checks, looking to understand what the game is, who you are, what your team is, what has brought you to want to make this game, and start to do some of those, as I say, early stage sense checks. Off the back of that, we'd want to receive the build. It's kind of a two-stage playtesting process there. If I receive a build, I'm going to play it first, have a little go at it, 10, 15 minutes of prototyping, or, well, upwards of hours sometimes if the game's got that much content and is that sticky. But play it first and foremost, and almost build a recommendation of like, I think there's something really cool here. So what I want to do next is make sure this isn't just a Jasper game, make sure this is actually something that appeals to more than one person. So get a broader subsection of people to play that game as well. So that could be people that sit across the QA team, the marketing team, amongst the rest of game scouting, production, design, other people as well. Largely people that we know will play that type of genre or that style of game or that platform. Not always, because I think that breakout factor is really important as well. But look to get a few more opinions to make sure that we're comfortable that actually this is doing something really, really nice. It's a combat-based game and that combat feels really smooth. It's a narrative-based game and it really is gripping from minute one of entry. It's creating the right atmosphere. It's different for every game. Specific genres have specific needs that they need to prove out in that stage. But if it's doing it, we will sense check that out with a large group. Off the back of that, we create an initial report from the playtest feedback, just to gather all those thoughts, gather all that feedback in a single place. At this point, I will say often will be shared with developers as well and say, here's the things we love, here's the things we want to poke away at, but on balance, cool game, let's move forward. And as the final stage to kind of demonstrate that captivating nature, we would then have an internal assessment stage where, a game scout will have a meeting with a bunch of internal stakeholders, big, scary people. We're talking CEO, we're talking head of marketing, head of sales, head of studios, and say, like, this game's a banger, 10 out of 10. We played it. We thought it was great. They played it. They thought it was great. Here's the team. Here's why they're exciting. Here's the USP. Here's the hook. Like, we think this is one we should be leaning into. And the hope is, if we've done our job properly, 10 times out of 10, those stakeholders say, like, yes, good, cool, let's move forward. This is one that we should be cracking on with. But all of that, like, just to, I guess, manage expectations, that is to decide this is one that we should now move into due diligence. This is one we should start poking about with more questions. So even at this stage, there's a lot of margin for failure, for rejection. Sadly, this is a huge part of that shortlisting process. It is a very, very shallow funnel at this stage. And the bar to hit that final stage is there has to be a certain level of competence proven out at this stage. These three C's blend together. But what is unique, or what I'd say is absolutely paramount for every game at this stage, is it does have that immediate hook that gets people excited. So that's kind of captivation and where we get to. Then moves to competent or competence. I couldn't decide which. I've gone with competent for now. So this is where we move a game into due diligence. We've decided we're excited. Wider playtesters have decided they're excited. Senior leadership in the business have decided this warrants some poking around. Let's go with this. And that's where we move into due diligence. So what that means from your perspective is we would arrange a call between yourselves and probably a designer, probably a producer, maybe a marketeer, maybe somebody from QA. The lineup changes a little bit based on the game. If it's a tech-heavy game, we maybe drag a programmer along. If it's not, maybe somebody else comes along instead. So it's not necessarily the same lineup every time. It's based on what we think is required to, ask the right questions to build our confidence in that game in the best way. So we would arrange that meeting, week's notice, something like that. And what we do at Team 17 is we would actually send you across a bit of a survey to complete beforehand. That's where we get a bit more granular detail about, what exact engine are you using? What version of that engine are you using? What word count have you got? What languages have you committed to localization already? Have you got any add-ons you're using? Any additional software that needs to be sort of considered? Any licenses that we have to think about paying? Is it online? Are you using peer-to-peer, or is it about hoster serving? How's that being operated? Have you built estimations for that? All these come in the form of a survey, largely because a lot of that is just simple yes or no answers. Having it in writing straight from you is really, really valuable. Secondly, it's a waste of your time and a producer's time to hop on a call and say, what is the work out of your game? And you tell them and they tick a box. We would rather this call be about actual specifics of your game. and get into sort of granular mechanics and the planning of what you're doing that's bespoke to exactly what your game is. So anything that's a bit more generalist, generic, could apply to most games we look at, come in that survey first and foremost. And then we have this call that goes through some of those answers, but then gets into the real detail of what it is you're proposing. Obviously, ahead of that call, I hope it's obvious, ahead of that call, the designer, the producer, anyone who is involved in that call will have played your game, will have all the documentation, will be fully aware of what it is that you're bringing to the table. So they're speaking from context with experience. They know exactly what it is that you're looking to bring in. And what we would also do ahead of that is look to see any documentation that you've got. So, you know, definitely stage one, we look at a pitch doc, we look at a video, we look at the bright, exciting, shiny stuff. At this stage, it really is about getting hold of resource plans, getting a look at budgets, working out, you know, what is your monthly burn rate, what assumptions you built into that, what staff you bring on for the project. If you've not got them already as part of your studio, at what point in the project are you expecting to bring in an animator, to bring in a VFX artist, to bring in audio? When do they drop in? When do they drop off? And just make sure that you have got a solid, concrete idea of kind of what goes into making this game. It's also where we'd look to make sure you've got the right level of contingency and the right level of risk mitigation attached to your project as well. I think that it's obviously walking a fine line, and when I talk about the commercial side of things, that's where it feels like it can be a bit of a contradiction. What we're not looking for is to sort of cheese the system and bring in games that seem a little bit cheap. There's no contingency, but you know, it's okay if everything goes well. It's going to come in for $1 million, whatever it needs to be. You know, actually, this is where competence sort of doubles up. Actually, rather than pitching in a 1.2, 1.3, 1.4 million euro project, but you've got solid contingency, you've got an extra couple of months of burn for every member of staff. You know who your key personnel are. You've got succession plans. What happens if they're unavailable to work? If your lead programmer is hit by a bus on month 3 of development, awful, obviously, and the last thing you want to worry about is like the bloody publisher. But like, you know, in theory, have you got a bit of a succession plan? Do you know what your plan B would be in those instances? Have you got contracts you can speak to? You know, these sorts of levels of consideration is what we'd be looking for. And when it comes to documentation, yeah, like anything you've got that shows exactly how you're building out this plan is always useful to see. And similarly on the opposite side, because that's very production heavy, the design side of it as well, we'd be looking to get hold of a GDD as much as possible. So very much a believer that over the course of development, you will find the fun, you will follow the fun, you will see where the game takes you, of course, but there still needs to be a plan and an initial scope of what it is you're looking to build. Without a scope, you can't have a budget, you can't have milestones, like it's just guesswork apart from that. So having a solid GDD that kind of explains exactly what it is you're looking to make. It doesn't have all the questions answered, but it knows what questions it wants to ask over the course of development is really valuable to see as well. And what you would then see over the course of that conversation is, say it's a 90-minute call, you'll have 15-20 minutes of a producer poking around at your plans and just saying like, what's your contingency here? And what happens in this instance? And why have you rolled this person on here and not 2 months previously? And what's happening? But the lion's share of it absolutely is going into the design back and forth and looking to understand specific mechanics you're planning on implementing, how you want to implement them, how you want to balance them, how you're going to make sure that you know, you're going to find the fun, absolutely, but done in a way that's got some level of structure and understanding to it. And the reason we do that is twofold. Firstly, it is to genuinely answer those questions, like it's useful for us to know. We want to ensure that level of thinking has gone into it. But secondarily, having the answers to those questions generally requires a good understanding of the genre of game that you're making. You know, if we're looking at, and we think of what's hot at the moment, a cooperative online roguelike game, you know, between 1 and 4 friends, looking at the likes of Gunfire Reborn, looking at the likes of Deep Rock Galactic, you know, whatever it is. You know, the sort of questions we're going to want to dip into is like, how will you balance that from a progression perspective? How do you balance it from, you know, procedural generation of dungeons? How do you plan that? What happens in an instance where you've got one player who's level 50, one player who's level 1? Do you have enemies that are level 1? Are they level 25? Are they level 50? What happens if the level 50 player then DCs halfway through a run? What happens to the level 1 player? Like, and you know, having an understanding of this is the level of balancing that goes into those best-in-class games. So if you're looking to imitate that or replicate that, you have to have an understanding of what they've tried to do in other games as well. So the reason we dig about these questions, it really is twofold. It's to show, you know, a level of competence of understanding your game, but it's that broader competence of understanding the genre as well, and what's important for this genre, how it needs to be balanced, what considerations you have to be aware of. it's always a really, really, really interesting call to have at the same time. If nothing else, we've got phenomenal people at Team 17, other publishers have the same. Being able to have, a good hour and a half long spitballing session with someone who's got the experience but is not in the weeds of your project can be so valuable, because they can sometimes, bring some really important learnings and considerations that you might have overlooked over the course of this chat. And it's not to catch you out. It's not to try and poke holes in your plan. It's not to try and cause problems. It's to help fill in those gaps. Like the sad truth of it is we believe they're already there because you are innovating, you are breaking ground, you are doing new things. So it's not going to be fully thought through. So what we're trying to do here is just also try and cover those gaps with you, because once you know where they are, we can mitigate it, we can build a plan. And that's the spirit of these conversations. So you've had that cool, big education session, met some amazing designers, love the team at Team 17. That's really nice. And this is the point where I suppose it starts to slip off of your radar. This is where Team 17 starts to do things internally. That's where our internal assessment process and approval process really comes together. So off the back of that call, we've got an understanding of what your game is in totality now, more than just a bunch of documentation. We've had a good chat with the brains behind it. We've got a good understanding of, that you understand where the risks are, where the problems are and how you're going to mitigate them. And similarly, if you don't yet know how you're going to mitigate them, we also know where we need to apply our expertise, our experience, our resource. If we ask a bunch of questions for a puzzle game that you want to bring to keyboard and mouse to PC, but also Switch, you've not thought about the sort of gamepad style control system and how that might correlate across, that's where we can think, great, so we'll just bear in mind at that stage, we might want to think about looking at a UX contractor who we can always draft in to help them with those sorts of stages. When it gets to those milestones, we can just plan for that resource on our side as well. So it's as much about making sure that you've got mitigations as it is making sure that we've got mitigations. And what that allows us to do is build out a full proposal of, to put it bluntly, what we think this game is going to cost us to launch and where we think the pain points are going to be with it. Every game costs money, every game has pain points, neither of those are red flags. It's just about being honest about them, being transparent about them, understanding what it is we're thinking about sort of jumping into partnership with. So we can create that report that says really strong in these areas, a few blind spots here, but with these members of our team or these contractors or this level of support, we think we can mitigate those accordingly. But with an assumption around plus 20% onto their timeline, plus 20% budget levels, this is, again, bluntly, this is a worst case scenario of what we think this game is going to take to launch. And that's where it starts to flow into the commerciality aspect, which I'll talk about as the final stage. But what we would do here is, much like the last stage, go to the stakeholders and say, remember that game you were really excited about? Like, we've done some digging and we think it's really, really cool. A few blind spots and that's okay. But if we can just nail this, 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 and this, then this game could be good to go. Like, we think we've covered all the issues. We think we know exactly where the risks are and we're happy to steam forward. Stakeholders, fingers crossed, say, sounds great. Doesn't seem like too much money. That's wonderful. Let's move forward to the final stage, which is just looking to work out the commerciality side of it. And that's the final stage, or the final consideration we go through. So as I say, this is largely done in more and more becoming sort of shared, but at the moment it's largely done in isolation of developers. This is where, again, we would, I've clearly got the wrong slide here, so I'm gonna have to update this and send it around after the fact, which is not cool. So I'm gonna have to probably just wing this a little bit, but in terms of commerciality and what we just demonstrate here, this is where we would start building out a benchmark for what we think this game can achieve, what we think it can perform. That's going to come from a few different areas. Firstly, the benefit of something like Team 17 that we have is the huge portfolio behind us. We've got games, we are agnostic by nature. We've got games in just about every genre, on just about every platform that have released into just about every continent. So in terms of having data on different audience bases, different territories, different platforms, how they all correlate with each other, there's a lot that we can get just from our past experience. But outside of that, we also would look at benchmarks and comparisons within the genre specific to your game as well. Ideally, what we'd be looking to do is build out a bit of a sort of idea of, who do we think are the key competitors? What do we think this game is doing different than them? Or what do we think it's doing better than them? Where do we think we're conceding ground to them? There has to be an understanding that a game is not going to be better than Deep Rock Galactic by every conceivable metric. So, if we're looking to do a similar sort of thing, you'd say, well, we're better in these areas. What other games can we see where these are the areas that are celebrated, that appeal to players? Are these arguably the areas that matter the most? Are we right to specialize in this space? So we would look to build out, a bit of a proposal of what we think the launch reception could be, what we think the immediate sort of uptake of the game could be, how it's going to perform in the market based on these different games that we've seen before. I will say a lot of the time you will see publishers, they are looking at historic data. I think that, something I do talk about a little bit later is the idea of, but what about what it could be? What about something new? What about something truly innovative? I think there's a bit of myth busting I want to do around that subject matter anyway, which kind of ties into the idea of this being an investment. We're not necessarily looking for something crazy different. Something that's a bit safer is always going to be more appealing when it comes to making that leap into an investment. But what we do there is ideally look to build out a bit of a forecast of, how do we think this game is going to perform compared to different comparisons that we can see on the market? How do we think it's going to perform based on, what we've achieved previously as a publisher? Obviously, if we look at a party game, I would like to believe it's fair to say that if you took the 12 best-selling party games of the last 3 years, Team 17's average is probably higher than that average, just because we've been so lucky to have the the amazing team behind Overcooked, the amazing team behind Moving Out. We've done some incredible things in that space before. So we probably prop up the average, and we have to understand that there is therefore an additional benefit to our name on that game as well. The next party game by Team 17, you would hope, would be received a lot better. So, it's not just what's come before, it's not just taking an average from previous sales, it's applying that sense of, but what difference can we make? What can we bring to the table? And build out a proposal of what we think we can achieve in terms of, units shifted, revenue gained over the first year, couple of years, 3 years, and build that into the model as well. What we have at the end of that, because what I suppose the second part we'd be looking to do as well is also looking to develop a bit of a go-to-market plan. So first point is, yes, if this game comes out, we think it can make $20 million across the first 3 years. That's really, really exciting. The second part is then, so how do we ensure it does that? What do we understand this game? Do we understand this audience? Do we understand this player base? Do we know what content they consume? Do we know how they consume it? Do we know how to access them? Is this a group, an audience base that is largely influencer based? Are they the sort of audience that go to events? Are they just hugely community focused? Are they looking for an early access campaign? These are the considerations we have to put in there as well to make sure that we know, saying you can do those numbers is one thing, but it takes a plan to achieve those numbers. And do we know what that plan is? Have we got a solid idea of what that's going to be? Assuming yes, once we have all of that, over the course of this process, we've then established this game's got a hook. We think it's really exciting. There's something unique here. We think the devs are fantastic. There's some real credibility there. They've shown competence. They've got a solid plan that we think is bulletproof. And then we know how to market this game, and we think there's money behind this game. That's been proven out by games that have come before. The things they're tapping into have been proven within different, within ideally a few different audiences. We know who the primary players are. We know who the secondary players are. We know who the tertiary players are. This seems like a solid investment. And we take all of that information one last time, bring it to those same stakeholders and say, this game you've been waiting with bated breath for, that you heard about way back when, here's the full plan now, here's the proposal, here's our commercial case. And ideally they say yes, and that is where you would then receive an offer. So that's the sort of winding path through the 3 Cs. And I suppose that is the thing I would like people to bear in mind is, when you don't hear something from a publisher, when you don't hear something from a game scout, it's because this is the level of due diligence that's happening behind the scenes. I know a lot of work goes into on the development side as well. I know there's a lot of heartache, a lot of headache, a lot of waiting. I'm not saying it's easy by any means. I've been there. It's incredibly tough. But at the same time, I think it's important to understand that publishers are not deliberately taking their time with things. There's just a lot of checks that have to go into place. I think that when you sort of ground this with the consideration that publishers are talking about investing millions of dollars, tens of millions of dollars sometimes into these projects, you want to be sure you're making a smart move with that money. So I think that's why we go through this level of detail. That's why we go through this level of sort of depth to make sure that we're as much as possible covering off all the different sort of angles that we can. So that's a bit of the path. What I'm going to lean into now is a bit about going into those 3 Cs once again and talking a bit about, in more detail, I suppose, but with bullet points and a few more visual cues, exactly how we might assess these things and what you can do to hopefully, when you're submitting a game to a publisher, try and weigh the die a little bit and the sort of considerations that you might want to employ to go into your pitch decks, be part of your conversations, just to see exactly, if you know the questions we're looking to answer, you can help us answer them. And that's the spirit of what we're trying to achieve here. So firstly, we'll go back to captivating. So what does that mean? What are the key things we're looking for to say, yes, this game is captivating? There's 4 things that I've pulled out. Honestly, again, there's infinite, you can go on this all day, but trying to keep this to as close to the hour and a half that I'm allowed. 4 main things that I sort of want to go through. Unique concepts, I've said a lot. And that is something that is obviously at the core of everything. I think that just cookie cutter games that are doing the same thing, they can fetch a return, they can be good work, absolutely. But they're not the sort of thing necessarily is going to get somebody excited about them. They're not going to feel unique. I think that the difference between the consideration that a publisher is going to have when they're reviewing your game, there definitely is that review of like, co-op roguelikes, to use the same example again, always do pretty well, and that's okay. So anything that's got those 2 magical words, you'd think is maybe a safe bet. That's not necessarily the game that publishers are looking to play. The business model of a lot of publishers is going to be having that reliance on games that are breaking through, games that are doing something very different. That's where a publisher will see its major growth from. And as a business, that's ultimately what we're looking to achieve. So, if we're signing 10 games a year, we're launching 10 games a year, and we see a steady return on all 10 of them, you're arguably staying quite stagnant. The ideal state is 8 of them see a steady return, and then one of them goes hell let loose and one of them goes overcooked, and suddenly you skyrocket and you hit that growth. And that's the investment portfolio, the balanced portfolio that's trying to be built. So that's why actually having something that's unique and has that chance of breakout is far more appealing than just safe as a concept. I'm going to contradict myself later, and that's part of the fun of this, but I'll explain it when it comes to it and talk about exactly why that is. But yeah, having something that is unique, that can capture the attention of players, can generate excitement. But as I say, the risk is going to be balanced there. I think something I've been saying to developers quite over the last 6 months or so, uniqueness is fantastic. A unique take on something that's been done before is arguably the sweetest of the sweet spots. And this is where I kind of want to contextualize it as, imagine if you are investing yourself. If you had $10,000, whatever, $20,000 that you had won on the lottery, that you'd won on a scratch card, whatever it was, and you decided you wanted to make your money make money. So you want to invest in something. You have 2 startups that are in front of you, and one of them says, we are seeing the subscription model seems really hot right now. We've seen people like HelloFresh, we've seen Birchbox, we've seen a lot of people moving into that sort of trade. So we're thinking something along those lines, but maybe with like a vegan take on what they're doing, or something a bit different to achieve the same model, but with a new market, with a new audience, a new theming, maybe looking to push into the dietitian route or something. And we want to work with personal trainers to allow for sort of weight loss initiatives as part of our subscription model. You'd be like, cool, okay, not groundbreaking, but like fresh take on something proven. I like that a lot. Then you speak to startup B and they say, this is just a whole new experience. You don't know anything like this. The world isn't ready for what we're doing. This is like nothing that's come before. It's unproven, it's unchecked, but we know the world is looking for it. Like, as sad as it is, you're going to put your investment on startup A because they have a solid idea of what it is they're looking for. They've got an idea of who it is they're appealing to and what that market size is going to be. So when we say unique concepts, we don't mean super maverick, sadly. We don't think, it's good to think outside the box, but having some consistency, having some safe bets within your concept is always going to be more appealing to a publisher, because part of the game we play is going to be risk aversion. So unique concept, big old tick. Engaging gameplay is really, really key. And I will say that this is one where it depends a little bit on the publisher. So I'm going to make a sweeping statement, but it's not necessarily true. If you look at someone like Team 17, we are a very strong gameplay first publisher. If you look at sort of some of the games we've had fantastic success with, whether it be Blasphemous, whether it be Age of Darkness on screen, it could be Marauders, Hell Let Loose, Overcooked, Moving Out. There's plenty there. And they often come with, games that have a very, very arguably simple mechanic or simple idea that is then, which can then be, have the depth added to over the course of level design, puzzle design, bringing more players into it as well. I think that there are other publishers that might specialize in sort of online live experiences. It might be they specialize in narrative experiences. There's lots of people that focus in certain areas. So I'm definitely skewing towards Team 17 here. But I think being able to not just understand a concept that is different, but see some gameplay that's just immediately visually appealing, it ties into the same thing. If we see a Metroidvania and the movement and the combat just feels smooth, it just feels swift, that's really, really exciting. If we see a party game, a couch co-op party game, and you can see that wonderful blend between collaboration, but also wanting to scream at each other with like mildly frustrating mechanics, like that's the sweet spot. That's what we're looking for. And that comes through in the gameplay. A first-person shooter, for example, you want to get a good feel of like, how is the handling of that gun going to feel? As you move around, how does the aim down sights feel? How does it feel when you shoot? What does the recoil feel like? What's the accuracy like? It comes down to that gameplay in the same way. So that's such an important element that when people are playing demos, when they're playing vertical slices, things like that, that's really what people, will end up looking for and really focusing on. I think that, we often see demos that might have 10-minute introductory cutscenes, that might have 15 minutes of tutorialization, might have all this kind of context and lore and narrative and world building attached to their concepts. Like, that's cool. That's definitely nice to have. But it's sort of additional fluff. Like, the gameplay is where we start, the gameplay is where it ends. So that's really the bit that we would focus on. Strong aesthetic and art direction. Obviously very important. People buy with their eyes. We know that to be the case. There's some games that have looked terrible that have sold really well. The opposite is also true. But as a general rule of thumb, you would see a correlation. If games look nice, people are interested. I will say that I think this does come with a bit of a healthy dose of salt. A gorgeous art style will not often save mediocre mechanics at this sort of stage. I think that, at an early stage where you're pitching, where you're prototyping, where you're looking to get published to support, I would say that the feel of the game has to be the priority, has to be first and foremost. A stronger direction absolutely can supplement that for sure, or it can definitely snowball that and create a flywheel effect. If there's a game which plays fantastically and also looks stunning and has a really interesting world here we're excited about, is a world where that gets fast tracked through a process. That's really exciting to see. And so that is key. But I think that, I do acknowledge with this one, there are so many edge cases of games that the art style hasn't been on point, but they've still done really, really well. So it needs to be considered, absolutely. And it is something that can grab that immediate attention, but the gameplay has to back it up. I think if you have a strong art style and the gameplay lets it down, it can do so much damage to that pitch and to your proposal. And then demonstrated potential, which is a bit of a catch-all phrase, I do acknowledge. But what that's really talking about is once you've identified, what you think is unique about your game, how is that being proven? So again, I'm talking largely about mechanics and gameplay, which we get through demos. It's going to come through vertical slices. It's going to come through something we can get hands-on and play. Definitely the equivalent to this would be for a narrative first game, getting that script unlock as early as possible and being able to download or being able to share a bit of a sort of narrative path that game is going to take with the key beats that player is going to experience, and a bit of analysis as to what emotions you're hoping to create and what sort of state you want the player to be in is going to be really, really valuable to see. With a live service game, for example, having an idea of, not just what new content is coming through, but how are you measuring the impact of that content? How do you know what those players are looking for? How are you going to ensure that you are using that live service to get that data, to get to get the data and to get the insights you need to make it ideally an infinite game. Like a live service game, the dream state is it never switches off. So how are you going to use those first few updates, that initial period of live service, to make it that game that it needs to be? So it can come through plans, it can come through scripts. As I say, with Team 17, it's largely going to be mechanics, it's going to be gameplay focused. So largely, like, demos is where we're looking for to have those things proven out. If you're telling us that your game is like nothing else on the market because the combat is second to none, and we can't play it and see that, like, it's hard to get excited about, I think, is the honest truth. And that's really what you're looking for as part of this phase. So how can you, I guess, weigh the die, as I said earlier, and make it so you've got more of a chance at this stage? Headline the uniqueness. I think that's a really important thing as well. I think that, putting your X statement at the very front of your pitch deck, explaining why it's different, why it's new, why it's unique, why we should be excited, is really, really key. Starting with, for a mechanics focused game, starting with narrative, starting with world building, starting with lore, starting with a bunch of big questions, hoping it's going to draw people in. Like, the sad truth is it won't. If you consider the job of a pitch deck is to make a game scout or a publisher manager's job as easy as possible to understand what is exciting about this game and why should we invest in it, that's why you need to lead with what is unique and exciting about it. That quickly ties into point 2 of explain why other people will agree. The job of a developer is to be passionate about every single facet of your game, and we love that, and that's amazing, and that's why we want to work with creative types. But there will be things that you find absolutely groundbreaking, stunning, and amazing about your game that sadly only you will find absolutely groundbreaking and amazing and stunning about your game. And that's great, and that's how you should be. But I think that, being able to work out why this is unique, what it's doing differently, and also why you believe other people will care about that is such an important statement. Because if you can, almost convince us of that, we'll be thinking, oh, like, if you say so, fair enough, that makes sense. You start the conversation in a positive place of, rather than just here's a cool thing, and here's why I think other people are going to agree with me. I'm not going to say you put the game scout on the back foot, but you're definitely going to make them question any doubts they might have, or going to make that first impression a lot more positive because you're thinking beyond just your own experiences and your own sort of tastes. The third point of understanding what needs to be proven and proving it goes back to my last point. This is a combat heavy game, show us the combat. If it's a puzzle game, show us a variety of puzzles. If it's an online physics game, show us that janky online physics. That's what we're looking for. So being able to isolate exactly why you think this game is unique, why people will care about it, what would come next would be, and it might start off with a video. In time, we'd probably ask for a build, but it doesn't necessarily have to be uploaded in the first instance. Being able to load a video or a GIF or a series of images that show how that unique mechanic could work and why you think it's interesting. Again, it gets that immediate buy-in of, you've told me this is new, you've told me people will like it, I can now see it, it does look fun, I'm bought in at that stage. It's just like laying out that path to make sure that immediate response is going to be more positive. Fourth one is identifying the areas to be important within the genre. So this is getting an understanding of, we know with a puzzle platformer, players are looking for these specific elements. So we are delivering these specific elements. The best games in this genre always have these key features, these key mechanics. So we're doing these key mechanics, these key features, but also we're putting a fun flair on this one, this one, and this one for these reasons. That is the ideal pitch that we'd be looking to see, because again, not does it just show that you have done your market research and had a look to see what players care about, somewhat close to point two, it also shows that you're looking for reasons to build on what's come before, which is a nice way to be starting from, rather than just coming at something because you think it's a good idea versus coming at something because you've looked at what other people have done before and you think you're building on it. Is a subtle change, but it's a huge change really. Making a decision because you've not thought of other options versus making a decision because you've reviewed options and this is what you think is correct, makes a massive difference when it comes to this stage. And the fifth one, and it's awful to say, but don't be too maverick. And this is what I was talking about earlier. Having a couple of elements that are unique, that are taking a fresh look at a proven formula or a proven genre, it's going to be perceived as a lower risk bet for a publisher rather than something that's totally off the wall, never been seen before, crazy different. We are in the business of risk mitigation and looking to see return on the investments we're making. And as I said, hopefully bringing great developers with us and doing wonderful things. Being too outside the box can sometimes just be difficult because, when you've not got those clear points of comparison, you haven't got those clear references to what is trying to be built here, it's hard to wrap your head around. And this is almost where I think hopefully the look behind closed doors of what a internal process looks like. If I can't understand fully what your game is, how do I present it to the head of studio, the CEO, the head of marketing as to why they should be excited about it? Like, you have to help me explain to other people why they should care about this game. To do that, I need to understand what the game is and why it's exciting. So that final point, I don't mean to cut down creativity, and there needs to be a flair of that with every indie game. But I think that just trying to work out, where is the limitations of how much risk is going to be acceptable is an important one. Competent is the next one. Same formula for the next couple of slides. So what does this mean? This one I think is fairly easy to sort of go over, but it's worth going through the points anyway. Technical execution, of course, is an important point. So having, technical proficiency and stability is really, really key. That's not to say that if you send us a demo and it crashes, we're never going to speak to you again. That's absolutely not the case. But having, being able to understand where your margin for quality needs to be. If you send us a demo that's got some build notes and maybe acknowledgement of like, I'm really sorry, but sometimes this happens, or this bit isn't particularly stable, that's absolutely fine. But if you send us a demo that is broken and buggy and janky and say, that's it, like launch quality, good to go, right? This is fantastic. Obviously, that's a huge red flag. So being able to A, execute it, and B, have some sort of alignment on what gold quality looks like and sort of what a game needs to be and how it should run is really, really key. So that technical execution is really, really important, really. But that is equal parts demonstrated technical execution, but also understanding of technical execution. That can come through the form of a technical, design plan, that could come through the GDD. That doesn't have to be proven at point of signing, but having a solid understanding of what you're stepping into is really, really key there. Thorough planning. I think this is one that I've included for the benefit of all our producers, because I think it's something that is becoming more and more necessary as games get bigger, as scope increases, as we get more complicated, as these amazing engines are allowing us to do crazier and crazier things. It can be very easy for games to spiral out of control sometimes from the original plan. So having a thorough plan of what it is you're making, how you're going to make it, what good looks like, what finished looks like is a really tough question. But having that level-headed mindset at the point of due diligence is really, really key. As I said earlier, we still want to find fun along the way. We still want to find that journey along the way. We still want to fine-tune things based on, when we can actually play them, get hands-on with things. So it's not to say that everything has to be mapped out and completed, but knowing the broad limitations of what it is we're looking to make is a big plus at this stage. The simple difference, the number of development plans that we see that don't necessarily have an end point. They sort of say, well, we're going to develop this for 12 months and maybe launch or maybe see what happens. And that's not what a producer wants to hear. Similarly, when we look at early access campaigns, the difference between, so we're going to do this for 12 months, get the MVP, fire it for early access, see how it goes. Arguably quite a commercial decision, but again, it doesn't give the producer much room to understand, but what does that fun game look like? What is the vision? What is the 1.0? Definitely these days, if a player is investing in a game in early access and picking up a game early, they're expecting new content to come through. They're expecting balancing, they're expecting sort of growth within that game before it gets to that 1.0. So having that full journey maps out is really, really key. And outside of that, having the broader documentation as well. I mentioned earlier, resource plans, budget plans, milestone proposals, all these bits sort of mapped together. It just builds confidence that you've got a concrete plan that you know what you're working on. A key thing that I think is really important at this stage, that I mentioned earlier, of course, is also knowing the key risks of your project, knowing the key problems, and front loading them into your milestones. Making sure you've got that critical path identified is a huge bonus with due diligence at any publisher you're going to find. If you lean into those conversations and say, look, this bit here, this feature is the big scary bit, so we're going to tackle it first and foremost, because once that's done, everything else is easy peasy. That's so much more reassuring than, look, this bit here is the scary bit, but we can get 95% of the game done without that bit. So we're just going to focus on 95%. And then when we're pretty much done, we'll probably now just tackle the hard bit. Is super worrying, because that's where slippage comes into it. That's where you have delays. That's where you get 95% of the way done, and suddenly you realize nobody knows how to netcode, and so you can never finish the game. So knowing what those risks are, front loading them, and building a plan in place to tackle them properly, big tick here. Understanding of players. This I've talked about in roundabout way a few times over, but this talks to so many things. This talks to expectations of players around early access plans, expectations of what sort of content should exist within a certain style of game. If you're building, are you building a game that is always online? Are you building a game that's got PvP content? Is there PvE content? How are you going to operate that? Having a good understanding of what's come before, what do players want to see from this genre? How can we replicate what's good about that while still providing something new, but make sure that we're not offering less? The last thing you want to do is be maverick and think outside the box and end up offering a lesser experience because you've missed an obvious thing the players are looking for. And I think the second part of this as well is it goes to understanding your genre. I think that there's nothing that I like more than when, a subject matter expert at Team 17, be it a marketing manager or a designer or somebody during due diligence is looking to fact check a developer or correct them on something or suggest a change. And the developer can say, no, I disagree. Like, we're doing this because, and here's all the reasons we're doing it. Whether it be they've done play testing with players, whether it be that they've looked at the successful games in the genre before and they're pulling specific examples from those games. When they've got a solid understanding of what good does look like and what players are looking for, it's really nice to see because that shows solid understanding, it shows competence, it shows research, it shows consideration. All these are good things. And the final thing, scalability and longevity. I saw a really interesting talk earlier this year that was almost saying that for every proposal, you should have 3 plans. You should have your expected/hoped route to market and what that looks like. But you should also have a plan to, what happens if your game comes out and nobody cares? What does that mean for your studio? How are you going to cover your burn rate? Have you got a plan B in hand? Which I think people are starting to think more about as well, which is really, really good. There's also that option C, which is what happens if the game comes out and you sell 500,000 units in the first week? Like, what what do you do in terms of further managing player expectations? Is there a DLC plan? Is there a sequel plan? Like if this game takes off beyond any of our wildest dreams, like how do we turn this thing into a franchise? How can you keep that support going? Because that almost becomes a new risk in itself. When the expectation from players is so big and there's so many eyeballs on your game, you almost have to keep it alive. So having kind of that scale up and also that scale down plan to hand at this stage is really, really valuable, because we can see whichever way this goes, you've got a plan, we've got a plan, we can execute it. It's a happy place to be. A few sort of things you can think about at this stage at point of pitch. First one, documents, really, really key. I mentioned it earlier. Anything you create, we will read, we will look over. Cover to cover, page to page, we want all the information we can get. So if you create it, it's not wasted time. Whether that be, we have leafed through, we have poured through 80, 90 page GDBs before. We've looked at resource plans. We've had pitch decks that are in the hundreds of slides long, which I don't necessarily endorse because that's a lot of work. But if you create it, we will read it. So do create it. It only benefits your game. It only shows more competence, and it helps everybody who's part of the partnership. Identifying your own risks and mitigation. I've talked about that before. If you come at us and say, here's my game and here's the risks, sure, that's a bad bet. That's not what we're saying. Know what the risks are and mitigate them accordingly. We think these are the risks, and here's how we try to caveat them. Really strong starting point. Not a lot of developers are doing that at point of pitch. I get why. It's because we're trying to be shiny and exciting and trying to be eye-catching as per point one. But at this stage, it's really important to have that information and be aware of exactly what it is you're making. Highlight your team composition and where they come from and what they, how that benefits the specific game that you're making. If you have got a gameplay, a combat first game, and you have a designer who worked at Riot Games who's working with you, mention them, talk about them, put them front and center, make sure that you understand what's important about your game, and that is what's celebrated in the pitch deck. If you are making and I say this with all the love in the world for the game, if you're making a Overcooked style game, arguably we don't care how experienced your narrative designer is. It's not really the point of the game. So understand what is key, understand what's important, and celebrate those strengths within your team, just to make sure that when we know where those issues are going to be, you've got that experience in hand, you've got that knowledge in hand, and you know what you're doing. And the final one is understand the genre, beat us at our own game. That's what I say. Part of this process is going to be poking holes. It's going to be asking big questions. It's going to be saying, why are you going this way when previous games have gone a different direction? I think that just a level of confidence and understanding and being able to say, we're actually doing it for these 3 reasons, and we actually saw evidence in this game that came out 3 years ago and was received really well. Great, you can talk us down. Part of this process is going to be looking to find those holes to make sure there's a plan that you've got, whether it be the initial plan is solid, whether you've got a plan B, a plan C in mind as to how you can navigate these challenges as they come through. But yeah, not just thinking about what's cool about your game, but how it compares to other things as well is so, so important. And the final one is the commercial piece. And hopefully my slides are updated this time, which they are. So main considerations here, marketable appeal. And this is, I suppose, where a publisher really leans into it. This is the expectation you would have on a publisher. This is the value that we bring to the table, but that's not to say it shouldn't be a consideration for you. I'm going to not go over this in too much detail because I think this is starting to blend into the previous webinar, but just to go over it at a much higher level, marketable appeal is really, really important. So looking for a game that resonates with a specific audience, this ties into my analogy about which startup are you going to back if it was your personal funds. There's one that knows exactly who their market is. They're one that's just doing something so crazy that they believe people will arrive. I think the belief that if the game is good enough, people will come is true to a level, but it doesn't necessarily make it a safe bet for a publisher when it comes to investing those funds. So having that solid idea of who that audience is, who you would be looking to target based on the games they play, based on their play habits, the platforms they play on, whatever it is, anything around this space is really, really valuable. Similarly, looking at market trends is a really valuable thing to be doing as well. And not just looking at market trends and looking to copy things. I think that there's a level of depth that can go behind this. Sometimes, the difference between someone who would see Vampire Survivors last year, maybe the year before, and say, oh, that did well, I'll copy that, versus someone that said, that did well, why did that do well? Where have we seen roguelike games progress over the last couple of years? What happened with deck builders a couple of years ago? How did they get to? What happened after Hades? What is the logical progression of this sort of game? that's what you should be pitching. So having a look at those trends and seeing what's come before in terms of like player types or you know how these genres might adapt previously is really, really key. Play market fit. I think, yes, like a publisher, this kind of ties a little bit into what I mentioned about sort of breakout potential, but publishers are looking for something that's got a clear market fit. There's a very easy X statement, there's a very easy message about where it is, what it is, where it's going to land. Being the first of something or the best of something is an old cliche. There is some truth to it, to be honest. Those two things are really, really valuable. And it's not to say that, you know, I caveat this with, and I'm not saying go totally rogue. The first of something that's just totally left field is not necessarily the ask. But, you know, doing something slightly different first is really what we're looking for. And the final one is the business viability. You know, a part of our process is going to be generating a forecast and building financial expectations of your game. You should be doing that too, and do that honestly. Do that pessimistically at times. Again, I'm sure it's been covered so many times over. Don't present a roguelike deck builder and say, well, Slay the Spire, like if we do those numbers, we're set for life. That is true. There's a lot of deck builders that don't do those numbers. So we're not saying be negative, like we have to believe in the game. Absolutely. If all the other things are true, like there's definitely a reason that you should, you know, you should believe your game is going to be one of the best in the genre. But just aiming at the top end and saying, well, roguelike's hot. Have you seen Darkest Dungeon, Hades, and Slay the Spire? That is roguelike. Let's go. To put it bluntly, that's not how we're going to forecast it. So don't manage expectations in that way. If you've got a far more honest, open, pragmatic forecast of what you think this game could generate, that is going to, if nothing else, add to the credibility, add to the competence that you bring to the table because you're being level-headed and you've got an understanding of what this game could achieve and what that means in terms of the investment. You know, if you say that you would like $1 million to make a game, and there is an assumption that we're going to bring QA support, localization, maybe port it to a couple of consoles and offer some marketing support, and the forecast then demonstrates that this game is, if it's lucky, going to make $1.5 million over the first 3 years, like it's probably a bad bet and something needs to change there. So you know, having that honest reflection on what you're presenting is really key as well. For so not just for proving competence, but also for managing your expectations, to be honest, in terms of what a publisher is going to expect from the game as well. And what you can do to help. I've talked about this a little bit through various slides. Identifying the competitive landscape, that goes to what I was saying before about knowing what games have come before, what they've done differently, and what journeys have similar games gone in the past as well. When you see big sweeping waves in the industry, absolutely, like roguelike has been doing that over the last few years. When you get these different nuances that come off of it, whether it be dungeon crawling, whether it be deck building, whether it be sort of team-based, you know, what is the general journey we see on those sorts of tropes or spin-offs or sort of sub-genres within that wider genre, and use that to try and work out, you know, not what's big now, but what's going to be big in a year's time, 2 years' time, based on what, you know, what we've seen in other areas. Don't just compare the wins. Like, it would be lovely if every game came out and did Fortnite numbers. It's not the truth. Be honest about it. It's a very healthy exercise for developers to be honest about that as much as it is for publishers. Built multiple scenarios. That was so close. But building out those multiple ideas of, you know, what does good look like, what does bad look like, what happens if this game comes out and doesn't sell a penny, what does that mean for your business, what does that mean for your team, what if it comes out and it defies expectations, where do we go with that? But building those multiple scenarios out to have, you know, always say having a pessimistic view, an optimistic view, then a realistic view somewhere in the middle is a good place to be, just so that you've got a few, you know, and if nothing else, it manages your expectations on what a publisher is going to perceive your game as being and give you an idea of how excited they're likely going to be when it comes to the commercial decision. As a loose rule of thumb, lower risk projects are going to be more beneficial than high returns. And what I mean by that is if you come to me and say, I want $2 million and this game is either going to do everything or nothing. Like, we're talking not a single player or the next Fall Guys. It's a hard bet to make. As you know, for any indie publisher, for any investor, again, especially publicly trading, where these are, you know, we have to be cognizant of Team 17's performance alongside this as well. That pitch compared to, here's a game here with a relatively somewhat optimistic forecast. We reckon we can make $5 million over the next 3 years. We're looking for $1 million to make it. Like, let's make some money together. Sure, it's not the most exciting forecast because it's not Fortnite, it's not Fall Guys, it's not doing those things, but it's more safe, it's more reliable, and it's that greater chance of return, which is an important consideration for a publisher. And then remember, it's an investment as much as a game. And this is an important thing that, you know, publishers places like Team 17, so many of our peers in the industry, they do love the craft, they love what they do, but we have to bear in mind that it is an investment at the end of the day. So, that we get excited about the product, we get excited about what you're pitching. There's so much enthusiasm for games that come through, but there is a financial bottom line that has to be considered. So it's worth being aware of that. And I think that if you can be aware of that and you can manage your expectations going in, and you can build out not just a concrete sort of budget proposal, but also a solid idea of like what a good launch looks like and what a realistic launch looks like, and performance looks like. I think that there will be some developers and some proposals that I know that I've seen, I'm sure every game scout has seen, that never would have got to me, because like with a bit of critical thinking at this stage, they would have realized actually this is a bit of a bad bet. But also manages your expectations. You can understand exactly how a publisher is going to respond to it. This will, help you anticipate not just how excited they'll be, but also what sort of deal structure they'll be looking to, to offer you in return, what sort of rev share they'll look like, what sort of recoup structure they're looking like, what sort of services they want to bring to the table. So I think that it is key for sort of showing that competence, but really this is just a sanity check for yourselves, a bit of a sense check so you know what you're proposing. If you put it in the view of not just, I'm looking for someone to help create my vision, to create my game, I'm looking for someone to invest their funds in this game to drive a return. It's not the fun lens to cast it through, but it's an important lens to cast it through. And the truth of it is, it's the lens with which we're going to be looking at it. So better to be honest and have that view yourself before you even pitch, so you know what to expect from it. Any questions? I had a longer version,
Awesome.
which I'm glad I didn't pull up. After an hour and 12 minutes, I've gone through a lot here. I hope that wasn't too much for everybody. But yeah, I'd love to hear from the room and see if people have got questions. I can stop sharing and see if people want to come through with anything I've spoken about.
I've got lots of questions in the chat, so maybe I'm going to combine a couple and share them, and then you can answer. So the first one was about how you assess the financial sustainability of a studio, like how important is that factor in decision making? And I'm going to couple that one with how important do you find staff distribution inside a studio and how that affects your decisions, like seeing $1 million project without a producer. So maybe tackle that one, and then I'll pick and choose.
Amazing, thank you. two really, really good questions. I think that in terms of sustainability of the studio, that is very important to us. There are definitely, within my team, there are conversations that we've had in the last few months with developers to say, like, there is a world where this game makes money. There's not necessarily a world where this game makes you money. Like, what is this really something you want to be proposing? I think the honest truth is we're not comfortable going into business for a project that we think is at risk of bankrupting a team or liquidating a studio. As part of our assessment process, we would have an expectation of a certain level of return that we would see on a game over the first 6 months, 12 months, whatever it needs to be. Part of the reason for that is to ensure that, right, within 6 months, developer is fully recouped, they're fully earning their rev share, they've got good cash flow coming through. Like, how long does that take? And I think that there's then a conversation that needs to be had of, say that we predict it's going to take 4 months to fully recoup an investment on a project. How is the developer surviving those 4 months? Is this one of multiple games and you've got income already? Happy days, maybe you can survive it. Maybe you want to increase your dev advance to account for that additional burn rate. Maybe there's some sort of negotiation about a lower rev share from day one that we could talk about. Like, how does this come to fruition? So I think that when it's a shorter period of time, there's, we will definitely jump into sort of mitigation mode and see how we can resolve that, because we don't want to cause that risk. If that, to put it bluntly, if that gap is so large that it's going to take so long for the developer to see anything whatsoever, to follow the logic down, that means the game is not making that much money. That means it's not really a good commercial bet. So we're probably not going to back it anyway. So it's equal parts commercial as well as principles, but that is not something we'd be comfortable moving forward with. But in that instance, you would get a call from a publisher to say, well, I would hope you'd get a call from a publisher to say, like, really think about what you're asking for here. Here's the data that we've got. Like, think about if this is the game you want to be making, if this is the right sort of investment for, for the game you've put out there.
Is there oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, please. I was going to answer the part 2 about a producer on the team, but
do that. Please. No, go ahead, do that. Yeah.
Okay. We definitely review it heavily during due diligence is the short answer, I suppose. So we ideally would look to have a full resource plan of who you've got in your project. And there will be assumptions that we have, once a game once you have so many developers in a project, we would expect a bespoke producer to be part of that team. We would expect a certain ratio of creatives to technical folk within that team. If you come to us with a plan to say that we've got 7 artists, 3 designers, 2 narrative designers, and a programmer, but it's okay because she's really good, huge red flag. Like, obviously, like, we need to make sure there's a good balance across those different disciplines. So there are definitely, and what I will say is we're not archaic in that sense. It's not to say that if your team doesn't match our perfect team structure, it's a no. It's to say that if it doesn't, we want to talk about it and just work out, like, how are you sure she's that good? Like, what's actually, because it might be the answer is actually all of our designers are more technical designers and they get involved in engine as well. And actually most of our artists can do similar things. Like, sometimes there's very clear mitigations and responses to those questions. So it is something we review. It's something we're very, very aware of. And definitely sort of the tech presence and the producer presence are 2 things that are really, they will often be sort of picked away at to make sure there's a good plan in place.
Okay. And then from a publisher's standpoint, if the developer has already received funding from another source, like often in Canada, we have a lot of indie studios that apply for Canada Media Fund, or maybe it's Kickstarter. Does that influence the publisher's decision?
I would say it depends. Like, and it really depends based on every single great type of what those funds might be. So I think that if it's got government backing, for example, investment from whatever sort of trade body or government that you're based in, I think that's useful because it brings the price down. It doesn't necessarily carry weight beyond that. That compared to something like Kickstarter, for example, which is like 5,000 people have put their hard-earned cash on the line because they believe in this game. It brings the cost down. That's nice as well. But that's more of a show of like, this is resonating with people. There is a community, they're interested in this. This is, it kind of ticks the captivating box for us already, I suppose, because it's got that immediate uptake already. So it's always a good thing, obviously. Like, asking us for less money is always wonderful. But I think the nature of where that prior investment has come from is kind of case by case. There's not a single case of, if somebody's already invested 10% in your game, we are more excited, because bluntly, that person might not have a clue what a good game looks like. You might just call a rich person on a good day, and now you've got an angel investor, but actually it doesn't really make a difference to the overall commerciality of the game. So definitely beneficial, and the bodies, institutions that provide this sort of funding are fantastic, incredible. But I'd say it's something that largely we would still conduct like the investment ourselves and make our own decision about the viability of the game.
Right. Okay. And if an indie game studio self-published initially, would publishers still be interested in republishing a game? They're asking all the hard ones.
No, it's a really good question, and the honest truth, I suppose, is it's kind of twofold. I mean, I'm assuming that this is an instance where the immediate reception hasn't been exactly what they were hoping for when they self-published. And so they're perhaps looking for a publisher to come in and revitalize the game a little bit and bring more traction, bring more of an audience to it, I imagine is the scenario. The sad, honest truth is, once the game's out there, you're pushing water uphill. It's a really, really hard uphill struggle. And we see games that come out, that don't break out until 2, 3, 4, 5 years after they launch. They get discovered by a group of influencers, or are finally stumbled on by the right person, or, more noise is created about it. Absolutely, but it's not commonplace. So it is a challenge for sure. I think that, honestly, there's a little bit of consideration on the publisher's part of, why didn't you think we added value before you launched yourself? Why is it only now that you think there is a palpable value to having a publisher aboard? So I think there's a little bit of trying to work out, what's actually inspired that decision. Is it desperation? Is it actually a well thought through plan as to why they're looking for a partner? So I think that it's not to say it's a no, but I think that to try and find a publisher after you've launched your game in the hope that they can turn it around and bring more audience and sort of help recover it, it is, the brutal comparison you have to strike is, if a publisher has got, finite funds, finite resources, only looking to launch so many games per year, so we don't burn out our marketing teams, our release management teams, all the rest of it. We can only take so many bets. Why take a bet on something that has got infinite potential because it's not out yet versus something which has come out and sadly hasn't quite hit the mark.
Right.
So it's not a no, but it's definitely tricky, and that's
Yeah.
the reason why, really.
Okay. And then going back to kind of the financial kind of analysis component. So could you share your internal rate of return assumptions and what your timelines are like with that? Like, are you expecting to recover your costs on a game within a certain amount of time? And what sort of profit margin are you expecting when you decide to sign a game?
For sure. So I think this kind of ties to the first question as well,
Yeah.
in terms of what we expect. Like, ideally, like we want a game to be, as a loose rule of thumb, we would expect a game to be ideally doubling its investment in the first 12 to 18 months or so, there or thereabouts. And that's total investment. That's dev advance. That's also marketing inputs. That's QA, localization, porting services, all those bits and pieces. And a large reason for that is because if it doesn't, dev's not recouping. No one's making money. It's a bad investment. It's not serving anyone's purpose. I think that, don't get me wrong, like there's definitely somewhere there's an argument for going a different route with it. If there's a game that's got a particularly powerful message, if there's some games that need to be made, some games that are providing additional value beyond just sort of the revenue they could generate because they're supporting a particular cause, or there's more of a sort of portfolio strategic investment you're looking to make, or there's other considerations as well. But as a loose rule of thumb, I would say that should be the assumption you try and work to. Like if we're putting like $2 million in total down in a game, we would like to see that there is a relatively realistic forecast where that game's going to make 4 million back in the first year or so, so that you've recouped, we get to a cash position of 0, and we're all making money. So you're sustainable, good bet by us, and everyone's happy. But as I say, there's some nuance to it, but that's a useful rule of thumb to apply.
Awesome. Okay. And then another one here. Do you use any tools or specific sites to track and understand the present market, or use anything to observe trends occurring across the market?
I mean, not a single tool, but a series of tools, absolutely. I think that is something that, with the games we're putting out ourselves, we will be launching them, gathering data, doing retrospectives. When we've got peers, rivals that are doing similar things, we'll do retrospectives on their games. We're seeing games that are coming through. We're finding these trends ourselves. There's not a single point of truth that will tell you what is going to be the magical game in 2 years' time. All you can do is use a series of different inputs and try and tie them together, and we do that as well. So it really is looking quite far and wide across the industry. There's so much you can get just from Steam services, whether it be Steam, Steam DB, Steam Spy, like these different elements. Just look at the PC market first and foremost, and you can draw some real sort of interesting conclusions and assumptions around. But honestly, it's more immersion across lots of different areas. It's looking for coverage across multiple websites, multiple platforms. We have the benefit that we also get ties into the platforms. We've got relationships with first parties, so we can get insight from them, data from them. But it really does just come from just immersion and pulling from lots of different areas rather than a single source of truth that kind of writes out kind of what our publishing strategy should be for the next couple of years. It's less formulaic than that, and it's lots of different routes that we have to analyze internally instead.
Okay. And then I have a couple questions here on genres. So
Sure.
I'll start with the first one. So how do you handle game submissions that fall into very niche genres or markets?
I suppose the first thing that we'd probably want to do is speak to the developer and ask them from their perspective why that would be a good bet, I suppose. I mean, from the pure investment mindset, like that has to be a question that we ask. If you're creating a game that has got a capped audience that is just going to be small, it's going to be niche, why is that where we should place our money, place our investment? And that's why I tied to sort of a previous answer, right? Where it could be that it's about a message that needs to get out there. It could be it's about supporting a particular cause. It could be about, trying something to sort of branch out and build some portfolio breadth or depth to what we're doing. So there are lots of good answers to that question. It's not to say that we just deliberately kind of challenge people on these things. But I think that, the difference in perspective here is the difference between, someone who sees 1,500 game submissions, well, 300 submissions a month, for the sake of easy maths, there's a lot of game submissions that we'll see that aren't niche genres, that aren't in theory capped in terms of their potential. So I think that there's a real interest in wanting to understand why that's the area you're dipping into, and there's a real willingness to learn, and there's definitely a desire to be flexible and ensure that we've got that diversity of portfolio. But I think it probably should be understood that, you know, our assumption cannot be, you know, you're presenting a narrative-based walking sim, this could be the next Firewatch. Like, that would not be a sensible way of assessing business. You know, things like that are fantastic and some of the best games there are. But I think that you should anticipate a bit of a sales job if you're submitting those sorts of games, just to understand, you know, really for those sorts of niche genres, niche markets, we're looking for the games that can transcend those markets, that can transcend what's come before. So explain to us why this is the one, and we can jump in on it. But there's definitely more selling that's going to be required on your part.
Right. Okay. And then getting into a specific genre, or maybe just more on the platform side of things, how receptive are publishers to the free-to-play market on PC and console? And how are publishers thinking about subscription services like Game Pass?
Depends on the publisher, depends on the game, depends on the platform. There's no one-size-fits-all approach. Some are great at it, some don't do it. Like, it really, you know, I would say that being the first, you know, this kind of goes back to being unique. Being the first of something on a publisher's portfolio is going to be a risk for that publisher. I think that, you know, it's worth, you know, bearing that in mind. So look at what they've done before, look at where their experience is. I think that this is, you know, definitely free to play is particularly interesting to me because Team 17 is historically a very premium games label. But free to play has been around for a while now. Like, it's an obvious consideration for us, and you know, a lot of the sort of core elements we have done really well before. Definitely live games, you know, games as a service, looking at early access models, looking at that sort of live content drop style of what free to play could be. We've got those sort of core elements as part of our portfolio already, but it kind of ties into, why would the next bet we make be on a free-to-play game where we know we've not got necessarily the expertise versus a game where it is more of a classically premium model that we've got the experience with? It's similar to the last question of, like, not against it, but expect an uphill struggle, because there is more risk applied to that just by the very business model that you're proposing. The other thing that I would say attached to that as well is, I think that the reason it's important to look at a publisher and what they've done before is also for your benefit. You don't necessarily want to be the guinea pig for a publisher who's never done free to play before, because with the best will in the world, like, that's also risk on you. And this is your game, your business, your livelihood, your team members that you're looking to support with this. So I think there needs to be due diligence done on your side around who the best partner is for those sorts of games as well, rather than, I'm not all implying people are doing this, but so rather than sort of scattergun approach, just sending your game to everybody, a little bit of shortlisting and due diligence on your side to pick out the correct partners. Odds are, if that publisher is not right for your game because they don't have experience with that business model or with that style of game, they're probably going to say no to you anyway. So, like, why waste your time with the pitch? Like, just pitch out the ones that have got a chance of saying yes because you're operating in the field that they operate in. So the business model and monetization, I think, is a really interesting one that, you know, no publisher will be against those things, because sure, like, Team 17 has not done a huge amount of free to play. We signed Fortnite too, obviously. Like, it's kind of, there's always those extreme cases, so you can never make a blanket rule of what you would or wouldn't do. But it's worth being critical in your sort of search and your shortlisting as well. And then on subscription models, things like Game Pass, PlayStation Premium, things like that, all for it. It's amazing for gamers. Like, it's a really good model to move towards. It's not our primary business strategy. It's a nice to have. You know, when we build a forecast, absolutely, we will base on what we think we can deliver in terms of premium sales. If we also get a Game Pass deal, like, good news for you, good news for us, that's fantastic. But it's a nice added extra. You treat it as a bonus, really, as and when it happens. Just because, you know, that is, with some games you can get, you know, a certain level of comfort that a first party platform might be interested, they may be interested, but it's never a guarantee. And going back to so many points I've made, whether you want to look at the, you know, cold-hearted business terms of just security of the investment, whether you want to look at the more ethical stance of making sure that your business is kept in business as well. You know, if a game making money or not making money is reliant on us getting a Game Pass deal for, you know, getting a 6-figure Game Pass deal to get it across the line, or a 7-figure Game Pass deal, like, you might just not, like, they might just be full that quarter. It might not happen. So I wouldn't say that that strategy is necessarily a safe bet for us, a wise bet for you. It's a great thing to be having, an amazing SKU to have to our bow, but definitely not our sort of our lead way of driving revenue. That's not we wouldn't assume that that's going to be the case, as much as we would try, of course.
Awesome. Yeah. Okay. And then just to close it off, because I know we're at time. So if a developer wants to show Team 17 a project, what should they do?
So many ways. So website, banging into the website. We have a submit your game page on the website. I've got a series of game scouts, including me, that you can always reach out to, whether it be through LinkedIn, through Twitter. Email addresses are somewhat easy to find if you look in the right places. You can always come directly to us. We also have just so everyone knows, we have a perk at Team 17. Like I'm sure a lot of people have seen like recruitment referral bonuses that a lot of companies have. We have a similar thing for submitting your games. So in theory, message anyone at Team 17 and they've got a vested interest in pointing you towards the game scouts, because if we sign that game, they get a little benefit. So we try to make it as easy as possible. Just find someone who's wearing purple and throw your game at them, and eventually it will find its way back to a game scout somewhere.
Awesome. Okay, well, this was amazing, very informative. I think that Jasper met the 3 C's. That was captivating, competent, very confident, commercial. Thank you so much for your time, for your energy. We look forward to having you back in October for the Alberta Game Series. And yeah, there's more information in the chat on that, and just appreciate all of you showing up today and participating. And we look forward to the next one. So take care and have a fantastic day and evening. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for having me.